Today we are doing 11-5 areas of similar figures. This is going to wrap up our chapter 11. This is from the McGraw-Hill geometry book. So we're going to talk about areas of similar figures and the proportion and scale factors between them. So we're going to start off with just the areas of similar figures. If two polygons are similar, then the areas are proportional to the square of the scale factor between them. What that means is if I compare the areas and I do the area of one shape and I divide it by the area of the second shape. So if I did area of number 1, area of number 2, I'm going to get k squared. It's the square of the scale factor. Well, I'm going to want k by itself. So what's the opposite of squaring something? I'm going to be taking the square root of the proportion of the areas. So we'll get in quickly to question number 1. Okay. What I'm going to do for all of these is I'm going to put my shaded over my unshaded just for consistency. I don't know my area of the second one. My whole goal is to find that area. So first I need to find my scale factor. I'm going to set up my areas are equal to. So I take my proportion and I'm going to square it. Okay, so when I square that 15 over 5, it's actually a perfect number 9. And if I want x by itself, I can cross multiply or bring the 12 up. These are going to get multiplied. So x equals 9 times 12. The answer for x, which is the area of my large one, is 108 meters squared. Okay. Question number 2. Again, I'm still looking for the area of my large shape. My area is x. So if I put x over 20, because I'm comparing the areas, it's equal to 6 over 2, because that's my proportion of the sides, squared. So 6 over 2 is 3. 3 squared, we're at 9 again by chance. Okay, how do I get x by itself? We're going to cross multiply. X equals 9 times 20. The answer is x equals 180 inches squared. Okay. And the pattern's going to continue. Now, sometimes, just as a heads up, this area right here, that proportion squared, is not always going to be a whole number. We'd prefer to leave it in fraction if we can, but most of the time decimals will still get you pretty close to the exact answer. So we're going to question number 3. So area of the second one is equal to x. The areas are proportional to the square of their sides. So side squared. And we see this as decimals. When I plug into my calculator, I'm just going to round to the hundredth place for this step. The more decimal places you use, the closer you get to the exact number. Okay. Cross multiply. 2.18 times 200 is 436 centimeters squared. Okay. Next question. Question number 4. I'm looking for the area of my shaded one. Okay. So x over 8,050. The proportion of my sides squared. Okay. So 16 over 20 squared actually gives me a perfect decimal of 0.64. I'm going to cross multiply. So that's actually it for the front of our notes. There's not much to it. The pattern's consistent. We were just looking for the area of the second shape. Now on the back, we'll get into scale factor. So areas of similar figures, scale factors, and missing measures in the shape. So this time, what if they give us both areas? How can we find the scale factor and how can we find the missing side? We're going to start off by defining scale factor and what it represents in these equations. So K actually stands for scale factor. So when we're looking for scale factor, it's represented by the letter K. So when they say find the scale factor, we're finding our K. So when we find these, it's actually the area of one over the area of the other still it's equal to K squared. Now, in the directions, and this is what's very important to know what goes on top or bottom, otherwise you'll have a flipped fraction, okay? This is key right here. From the unshaded to the shaded, okay? So when I set these up, this tells me what's going to go on top and what goes on the bottom. So the unshaded is going to be my numerator, and the shaded will be my denominator. So when I figure this out, it's going to be, it's my unshaded area over my shaded area is going to be equal to K squared. Okay, so we'll get into question number 1 to start off. Remember, we first have to find our scale factor. That's part of our answer. And then we're going to find our x. Okay, so question number 1. Okay, what is my scale factor? Well, my unshaded area divided by my shaded area is equal to my scale factor squared. Well, if I want to get my K by itself, what is the opposite of squaring something? Square rooting. So I'm actually going to square root right here and square root right here. Here, the square root cancels the square and the K is by itself. So square root of 54 over 216 is actually 1/2. So my scale factor is 1/2. So how do I find the missing side? 8 over x is equal to my scale factor. Okay, I'm going to cross multiply. 8 times 2 is 16. 1 times x is just x. My missing side is 16. Okay. Question number 2. Question number 2, I'm going to start off by saying the area of the unshaded over the area of my shaded is equal to my scale factor squared. Again, I want the scale factor by itself, so I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And that square root cancels the square. Okay? And I'm going to round to the hundredths place here. Remember, the more decimal places you use, the closer you get to your answer. This does not give me a beautiful decimal. I could leave it as a radical if I wanted to, but I think for most students, they want an actual concrete number with like a decimal point. My scale factor is 1.32. So proportionally, again, this divided by this. Okay, so 28 divided by x equals that 1.32. Okay, so I'm going to cross multiply again. In this case, I'm going to have to cross multiply and divide. One of the things we've been talking about is doing multiple steps at one time. If you want the x to move up and the 132 to move away from the x, these two pieces are just going to switch places. Okay, so I'm going to have 28 divided by 1.32 equals x. And when I type that in, I get 21.2 equals x. And that's feet. You know, we try to label. Okay. Now, if you're stuck and you don't know what I did right here, I'm going to quickly explain it. Okay. I had 28 over x equals 1.32. So what I did, without having to show too much work there, I had 28 over x equals 1.32. Well, if I cross multiplied, I got 28 equals 1.32x. Well, right now those are being multiplied. How do I move it to the other side? I divide by 1.32 and divide by 1.32. This divides to 1, so it's not there anymore because it's 1x. And I have 28 over 1.32, excuse me. So that's how I did 2 steps in 1. Again, if you want the x, if you just want these two to move around, they can just switch places. Okay. Got 2 more questions to do. You know what? We'll just do one more. The pattern doesn't change. Everything is the same. Okay. So here are these pentagons. Sorry. Okay. And for these pentagons, I'm going to start off the same way. The square root. I'm actually jumping ahead of myself here. I'm going to set up my areas first. The area of the shaded over the unshaded equals k squared. If I want k by itself, I take the square root. And the square root cancels the square. Square root of 300 over 900 as a decimal. Again, we'll run to the hundredths place here to give us closer to the exact answer. Scale factor is 0.58. So if I compare the sides, trying to get nice and zoomed in there, but okay, I have x over 21 equals my scale factor. Okay, cross multiply, x equals 12.2 centimeters squared. Here's my answer. Okay, this is going to wrap up our 11-5. If you like these videos, please subscribe to this channel. Hopefully it helps you with geometry, and I hope you have a great day.